I'd like to thank Ballygar Carnival Committee for the invitation to make this presentation. My interest in the Malahide murders dates back to probably around 1960, when I remember my father indicating that the story of the Malahide murders was being included in a book written by Judge Kenneth Deal, and that the book was being, or extracts from the book were being serialized in the Sunday Independent. As it so happened, I don't think the actual case of the Malahide murders was actually serialized or part of the series, but it was certainly mentioned in the advertising and the promotion of the series of extracts, and it was also included in the book. Michael Hurley from Turlough kindly sent me the extracts of the book relevant to the Malahide murders recently. He happened to be the son of the guard who participated in the investigation of the murders and had a keen interest in the outcome. Now, few of the atrocities that occurred in Ireland between 1923, at the end of the Civil War, and 1968 or 69, when the Troubles began in Northern Ireland, could match the atrocity of the murder of the 6 people in Malahide in 1926. So the family were involved with the McDonnells, and the story was well publicized in relation to what happened in Malahide and the subsequent trials and so on. But what was never really focused on very much was the Ballygar connection, and who were these people, where did they come from, and how come they were in Malahide, and how many other members were in that family. So that is the content, or the presentation that I'm about to give now. And I'm going to move over to use my sharing my screen. Now, the title I've given the talk is The Tragic McDonnell Family from Ballygar. When you visit Ballygar Church, anybody who has been there, and some of us have been there quite a few times and quite often, or maybe go there regularly, you find a plaque on the wall on the left-hand side which says, "Holy Mass shall be offered in the church for the McDonnell household, who died at Malahide, Holy Week 1926, and their relatives once a month in perpetual remembrance." The date on that is AD 1928, and the name Edward Dooley refers to the then Bishop of Elphin. So who were the McDonnell family? Where do we start? Well, we can start with James C McDonnell, born in 1825, and he died in 1885. So he was 60 years of age at that when he died. By 1855, he was 30 years old, and he was a tenant in the Killeroran side of Ballygar of one Dennis Henry Kelly. Now, he had a substantial holding, 33 acres of land valued at £25 10 shillings, and house and buildings valued at £13 10 shillings, when normal dwelling houses or people's living accommodation could be as low as £1 or even 10 shillings. He married Anne Dignan, born in 1836, who died in 1880, on the 12th of February 1855, and that information is to be found in the Ballygar Church records. Now I want to talk a moment about Peter Dignan. Peter Dignan, who died, I think, presumably around 1860, and his wife was Margaret, I don't have her maiden name, who died much later in 1884, but she was born in 1805. Now, Peter Dignan has substantial property in Ballygar on the Ballygar side, or Ballygar townland side of Ballygar town. He had 42 acres in land in total, and buildings to the value of £14. So by comparison with James McDonnell, he was somewhat bigger farmer and more substantial buildings, but they were in different places. He had a son, Thomas Dignan, 1838 to 1908, who married a Sarah Kelly. They had 11 children. And one of their sons was Reverend Dr. John Dignan, who became Bishop of Clonferth. He died as recently as 1953. Now, I believe the Dignan family originally came from Mount Mary. Anne Dignan, as we said, was the daughter of Peter and Margaret Dignan. And James McDonnell and Anne Dignan had 13 children, 7 sons and 6 daughters. But as I said, noted already, she died in 1880. And at that time, the children ranged in age from just 3 years to 23 years. Now, I'm going to go through the individual members of the family, hopefully reasonably slowly, as I have a tendency to race through the presentations, which I'll try and avoid, and explain what happened to the different members of the family, and illustrate that this family was more than just the members that died in Malahide. So the eldest member of the family, number 1, was Thomas McDonnell. He was born in 1857, but he died in 1911. He took over as head of the family business on the death of his father in 1885. He did not marry. He died in 1911. He was 53 years old, and the cause of death was tuberculosis. What's notable in relation to him, or a reminder in relation to him, is that the high altar in St. Mary's Church in Ballygar was donated by the family in his memory in 1914. And this is what we're talking about. This is somewhat modified from my earlier recollections of the high altar pre-Vatican Council, when the priest said mass and with his back to the people. That was changed, and the altar was modified to accommodate the post-Vatican Council regulations. Now, the second member of the family was John C. McDonnell. He was born in 1858 and he died in 1909. Now, he was in Dublin at the time of his father's death in 1885. He was studying to become a solicitor. He returned to Ballygar to help run the family business, and he stayed there until about 1891. Then he moved to Galway, and he became, and these are a quote from the Tribune, I think it was at the time, Galway's leading public man and one of Ireland's most patriotic sons. He was a very close friend of Martin Moore McDonough, and some of you may have seen a book recently published by our author by Jackie Cunny in relation to Martin Moore McDonough, who was born in 1860 and died in 1934. You can see that they were of a very similar age, but they were very close friends, politically as well as everything else. Now, the politics of John C. McDonnell was that he was, inverted as a quotation, an ardent nationalist. You're now talking in terms, of course, events that happened pre-1916 and the politics of the situation. He was very involved in the Land League and later in the National League. He was a member of the Montpellier Board of Guardians. He was a governor with Ballinasloe Asylum. He was a member of Galway County Council. He was a member of the Technical Education Committee, which I presume would be the forerunner of today's GRETB, Galway Roscommon Education and Training Board, or what was formerly the Vocational Education Committees. And he was a member of the Agricultural Committee, which was probably the forerunner of the County Committees of Agriculture. He was involved also in business in the Galway Woolen Factory, which was located in Newtown Smith, started in 1895. He also acquired Summerhill Farm in Newbridge in 1907. And there was a dispute there in relation to permission to graze cattle on the land, but leading to a cattle drive in 1910. Now, John McDonnell married Margaret Ferguson of Winfield Lodge in 1888. Her family included her uncle, Father Thomas Burke, a Dominican preacher, very, very famous Dominican preacher. They had one son, Patrick James McDonnell, and he was born in 1891 in Dominic Street in Galway. Now, Margaret McDonnell died in August of 1908, and John C, when C stands for Christopher, died in August 1909 in a Dublin hospital. He was just 51 years of age. So again, very, very young at the time of his death. Patrick James McDonnell, his son, just as it followed through on the tragic element of the family, as we said, was qualified as a doctor, and he married a Mary McGowan from Killeroran in June 1920. Now, he worked as a doctor in Islington, London, and he was a police doctor for 7 years. In 1935, he contracted pneumonia and was hospitalized. His wife visited him while he was in hospital, but he died and his wife died within 48 hours, 1935. He was, at that stage, about 44 years of age. Now, the next third member of the family that I'm going to talk about is Margaret McDonnell, born in 1861 and died in 1892. So you can see she was only 31 years of age. She married Thomas Kenny of Dignan House in about 1882. They had 3 daughters and 2 sons. One of the sons, I think, was Thomas Kenny, who was fought in World War I and was wounded. He was based at that time in London. Maria died in October of 1892 in Dignan, and subsequently the following year, the Dignan house and the lands were offered for sale. Robert McDonnell is the 4th member of the family that I'm talking about. He established a business including a shop and pub in Ballyforan, and he married a namesake, a Margaret McDonnell from Shanballyluski, Dysart in 1897. They did not have any children, and he moved eventually to Dublin. I haven't got the exact date, but it certainly was before 1926. Now, he died in Finglas in 1939. He was aged 77 years. Finglas was in a nursing home. It was in a nursing home in Finglas at the time. They lived in Drumcondra. This, I think, was probably the premises that they owned in Ballyforan, but people with better knowledge locally might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. James McDonnell, 1863 to 1939. He established a business on Main Street, Ballygar after 1901, because in 1901 he's recorded as being in the family home business on the Diamond in Ballygar. And I think that business premises at a later point was Murray's or Hughes's. He married Bridget Wall from Ballygar, the daughter of Garrett Wall and Mary Kenny. They had 2 daughters. And in 1923, he sold the premises, the lands, and the interbury rights. They moved to Lower Saltail, and he died there in November 1939. He was 76 years old. So that's 5 members of the family accounted for, and we move on to number 6. Margaret McDonnell was born in 1865. She resided in Ballygar with other members of the family. And when the 2 brothers and 2 sisters moved to Dublin in around between April 1918 and March 1920, she was one of the family who moved with them. So there was 5 of the family moved to Dublin. They lived in the Malahide, County Dublin, and I'll be coming back to that again. But she died in February 1925, aged 59 years following a stroke. And we'll illustrate that later on. So she was about 59, as I say, around 59 years old. One member of the family that I haven't been able to determine what happened to her was number 7, Kate McDonnell. She resided in Ballygar in 1901, and her age at that time was given as 34 years, which tallies with the birth date of 1866. But she's not listed as a member of the household in 1911. Nor can I find a record of her marriage or of her death. Nor is she listed on the headstone in Killeroran Cemetery, and I'll be coming back to that later on. So what happened to Kate McDonnell? I don't know. Maybe that information is known locally. One might hazard a guess, but I won't do that in public. Number 10 in the family. Now, I've skipped some numbers here. It was Agnes McDonnell, 1871 to 1904. In 1901, she was living with 8 of her siblings in Ballygar, but she died from pneumonia in 1904 at a mere 33 years of age. So another very young member of the family at the time of their death. I've moved now to number 12, which is Philip S McDonnell, 1874 to 1918. He trained as a solicitor in Dublin. You can see the pattern here following where his brother John C. had started out initially. But after the death of John C., he moved to Galway. And he was out practicing as a solicitor in both Galway and Ballygar. He married Nora Purcell from Cashel, Tipperary, on the 2nd of October 1918. They went on their honeymoon to Northern Ireland and they returned to Dublin. But while in Dublin, they both contracted Spanish flu, influenza at the time, but what was at the peak of the Spanish flu outbreak, in which a lot of people died, including a granduncle of my own. Philip died on the 26th of October 1918 at just 44 years of age. This is a photograph of Philip McDonnell that I extracted from my newspapers. It's one of the few that I was able to get of any of the members of the family. Individual photographs. Now, Philip McDonnell, again, was deeply involved in politics. He was a nationalist, a supporter of Home Rule. He was a leading figure in the Galway United Irish League, which came after the Land League. He was a member of Galway County Council, and he sought to stand as a nationalist candidate for MP in Galway in 1914 in a by-election caused by the death of the previous incumbent. He was president of the National Volunteers in Galway. Now we come to the other members of the family. Annie, born in 1868, Joseph, 1870, Peter, born in 1872, and Alice, born in 1877. So Alice was the youngest member of the family, a mere 3-year-old, when her mother died in 1880. This was the core group of the family that resided and conducted the business in Ballygar, in addition to their sister Margaret. Joseph was a draper, and in show you the extent of the business, in 1911 there were 4 assistants resident in the house to the draper. Peter was a grocer, and he had 2 assistants residing in. Now, in about 1918, they sold the business and left Ballygar. Why that happened, the reason for the sale, I don't know. None were married. They ranged in age from 57 to 41 years. Undoubtedly, they were well-to-do, and that will be illustrated later on. And the business was purchased by Patrick Pettit, who at that time was had a business at High Street, where subsequently Killeroran's shop was. I'm indebted to Brian Scanlon and to Paul Connolly for this copy of a photograph going back to 1910, showing the McDonnell premises. And you can see the different doorways and so on. And not much change in that in the subsequent 60 years, it's the best of my knowledge, or best of my memory. Included there are members of the staff, 2 of the McDonnell brothers, a constable, I think he was Constable Maughan, and so on. Paul and Brian would be able to identify them particularly. And this is, of course, what was the McDonnell premises as it exists today in the Diamond in Ballygar, with a very dominant position in the town. Now, they eventually, whether directly from Ballygar or following some living elsewhere, they moved to La Mancha in Malahide. Now, La Mancha was a large country house on 30 acres. The purchase price for it was, that they paid for it was £4,600, and the purchase was registered in 1920. So between 1980 and 1920, they moved to Malahide. It was a two-story building over a basement with 5 bedrooms. They had 2 resident employees or servants, James Clarke and Mary McGowan. And they also employed a gardener, Henry McCabe, who lived locally. The sale of La Mancha was advertised in the Irish Times on 27th of March 1926. I think that's something that needs to be borne in mind when dealing or thinking about what happened subsequently. Now, this is a photograph here of the junction of the Swords Road and Malahide Road in Dublin. Left and right is the Malahide Road, and coming in to join it opposite the gates there is the Swords Road. And that is some of the gates into Malahide Domain, Malahide Castle grounds, and so on there. And obviously the cricket ground is part of the facilities that are to it. For people who have any recollection or knowledge of Malahide, they'll recognize it. The significance of that is that the La Mancha house was right at the La Mancha estate, came right down to that junction of the Malahide Road, this northern part of it, and the Swords Road. And that is the location, 30 acres there. Needless to say, that's all now built up as housing estates, particularly an Ardnamara estate. Just a note on James Clarke to make sure we cover all the people that were unfortunate in the tragedy of 1926. He was born in Killeroran, 18th of January 1881, the second son of a Pat Clarke and Biddy McDermott. Now, Biddy McDermott was from Rowan, and at that time there were in those years, around the 1800s, 1870s, 1860s, there were 2 McDermott families in Rowan. I can remember one of the family, the last of one of those families. My great grandaunt was married to a McDermott. He was one of 9 children. And in 1901, he was employed by the Clarke family of shopkeepers in Ballygar. Now, his name doesn't appear to be in the 1911 census for the Ballygar area, as far as I can ascertain. Now, whether that's just an omission or whether he was elsewhere, we can only speculate. Mary McGowan, I've limited enough information on, other than she was born in 1876. It was recorded at the time of her death that she was born in Lusk, County Dublin, though I have a suspicion that they lived in Skerries for a period, particularly around 1901. And I think in 1911 she was working as a servant for a family in Lusk, a farming family in Lusk, coincidentally by the name of Martin. Now, we come back to what happened on 31st of March 1926, which was Holy Week. And on the Wednesday morning, the house was found to be on fire. The alarm was first raised by Henry McCabe. It was evident that the house had been set alight. 6 bodies were discovered in the burned out ruins, 3 women, and the cause of death in the 3 cases of the 3 women was not determined by the time of the inquest. 3 males had fractured skulls. And this is a photograph from the newspapers at the time of the burnt out remains of La Mancha, 2-story house over a basement. Substantial premises, but note that it was on the market from the previous week. This is Yellow Wall Cemetery in Malahide, and this is the burial plot of the McDonnell family. And you'll note that pathway down on the left-hand side, that's the entrance. Way up in the corner there on the left-hand side is the entrance to Yellow Wall Cemetery. If you walk down a relatively short distance, you come to the burial plot, and it can't be missed with the imposing statue of the Blessed Virgin on the plinth. The inscription in it, I transcribed the inscription, and it says, "Of your charity, pray for the souls of Margaret McDonnell, late of Ballygar, County Galway, who died La Mancha, Malahide, 19th of January 1924. Her sisters Annie McDonnell, Alice McDonnell, her brothers Joseph McDonnell, Peter McDonnell, also their faithful servants James Clarke, Mary McGowan, who died at La Mancha, Malahide on or about 31st March 1926. Mother of Sorrows, intercede for us." So notice that the Margaret McDonnell was obviously interred before the remainder of the family died. Now, the civic guards carried out an investigation. I use the word civic guards because that's what they were called at the time, later became An Garda Síochána. And they found clear evidence that a meal that the family had been having and with the servants had been interrupted. Blood-stained clothing was found in 2 of the bedrooms. A safe in the basement was empty. 6 pairs of trousers were found in McCabe's house that evidently belonged to the McDonnells. And in the pocket of one of those pair of trousers, which McCabe was wearing, belonging to Peter, they found the key of a safe in the pocket. There was a suspicion that poison had been administered to members of the household because for about 2 days before the 5, all members of the family were sick, and callers to the house gave evidence subsequently of this, such as youngsters selling tickets and other people. Subsequently, there was an order for the exhumation of the bodies, which occurred in May of 1926. This is maybe 6 weeks after the tragedy. And traces of arsenic were found, attributed to a weed killer, which was had been found on the premises, or was on the premises. The inquest opened on the 2nd of April, very, very quickly after the death occurred on the 26th of March. So the witnesses included, just as a matter of interest, 4 people, some people from Ballygar. Michael Wall was a brother-in-law. His sister was married to James McDonnell, the man that had the premises where Maria's shop was subsequently. Canon Keelty PP of Ballygar remained a friend and visited them on an annual basis, apparently, after they left Ballygar. Mrs. Robert McDonnell from Ballyforan, but then living in Aaron Road in Drumcondra, gave evidence. Her husband was too ill to give evidence, so she gave evidence in his place. And Thomas Clarke, a brother of James Clarke from Killeroran, gave evidence. Now, the inquest wasn't concluded on the day; it was adjourned to a later date. But this shows just a limited involvement by people from Ballygar in the subsequent inquiries. Now, the story of Henry McCabe is best summarised as follows. He was born about 1901, probably in Braithwaite Street on Merchants Quay, beside the river there, on the south side of the river, as you head out towards Euston Station. As a youngster, he immigrated to England, and he served time in prison there for a crime that was not specified, but obviously came up in later information at the time of the trial. He attempted the murder of a woman in Birmingham, and for that he spent what appears like a very short term of 15 months in jail. In England, he married Kathleen Boyle from Malahide in 1905, and obviously returned to England because with the Boyle family, to live with the Boyle family in Malahide. Employed by the then owner of the La Mancha premises, residing later on at Parnell Cottages in Malahide. And by 1926, he had 9 children. Henry McCabe was charged with the murder of 6 counts of murder and 1 of arson on the 12th of April 1926. Very short period, just over 2 weeks after less than 3 weeks after the fire. The trial began in November of that year and lasted for 6 days. The jury returned a verdict of murder after just 50 minutes deliberations. And as was the want at the time, Henry McCabe was sentenced to death. Leave to appeal was refused. There was a petition, though, looking for clemency, which didn't get anywhere. And he was executed by hanging on the 9th of December 1926. And this here is a photograph with the man with the cap of Henry McCabe from a newspaper at the time. It was one of the early days trial taken on the 8th of June 1926, which was even a few days before he was charged. Now, the financial situation of the family is interesting in terms of the wills and compensation subsequently. Letters of administration were issued in October of 1926. Robert McDonnell of Drumcondra, their brother, was the executor. Peter McDonnell's estate was valued at £4,368, and Joseph McDonnell's estate was valued at £4,099. Those two figures are in the context of that the cost of the La Mancha when they bought it in around 1920 or maybe a bit before it was was given as £4,500. So that serves to illustrate that they were well-to-do. And in January of 1927, damages of $3,250 were awarded to Robert McDonnell against Dublin County Council because of the destruction of the house and the contents. McCabe told the guards during the investigation that he and James Clarke were told by the family to bury a safe that they had in the garden, and that about 3 years later that this safe was dug up. A previous employee, I think the cook before Mary McGowan, gave evidence of items of jewellery owned by the McDonnells. And 7 years after the tragic events in La Mancha, a boy found 2 silver watches, one inscribed James Clarke and one J McD, and heavy gold watch chain in a garden where McCabe had once worked and near where he lived. Well, the name of the boy, I think at the time that found those was Dinning. Now, this just to remind you that there are other connections back to Ballygar. This is the McDonnell family plot in Killeroran Cemetery. It is a useful source of some information in relation to the family, but it's not by any means complete. The inscription on the Killeroran plot goes as follows. Dedicated to the memory of Anne McDonnell, who died September the 1st, 1880. Philip McDonnell, 26th of October 1918. Anne McDonnell was obviously the mother of the 13 family. Philip McDonnell was the solicitor. Pray also for the souls of James M. McDonnell, died November 27, 1885. That was the father of the family. Maria M. McDonnell died August the 10th, 1880. And I suspect that she, given her age at the time, was a sister of James. Agnes McDonnell, who died from pneumonia in 1904. John C. McDonnell, who was the businessman in Galway, he died August 1909. And Thomas McDonnell, the eldest of the family, the man for whom the family donated, and memory of whom the family donated the high altar in Ballygar, dated 1911. it doesn't give the complete list of all the members of the family, and whether they're all buried there or how many of them are buried there, I think is a bit ambiguous at the moment. So in summary, the McDonnells were a major business family in Ballygar for about 70 years, from 1850 to 1918. And I should say a very successful business family in terms of they accumulated considerable wealth. There were political activists in the family, in particular. John C., Philip S., and James was also mentioned, has been deeply involved in the nationalist movement. The nationalist movement preceded the 1916 and the subsequent War of Independence and so on. So there were that more aligned to the Parnell movement and the Home Rule movement. They suffered a series of family tragedies, including, as I mentioned there, the death of their mother at a very young age, the death of daughters at very young ages, the death of sons when very, very young, or even of a grandson. And of course, 4 siblings that were murdered in Malahide in 1926. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and hope that in your next time in looking around Ballygar, either in the church, in Killeroran Cemetery, or down at the Diamond, that the McDonnell name will mean a little bit more to you. Thank you again.